This episode is supported by NatWest, providing ease of mind when it comes to business payments.
NatWest Payit, the bank's own payment solution, facilitates customer payments in near real time while allowing companies to track live spending. Need to collect payments without customer account numbers or process refunds without holding on to personal details? Payit has your business covered.
Payit connects directly with each customer's bank account using an API, which also allows data to be seamlessly and securely passed onto third parties. That means you can provide the best payment experience on the front end while empowering your back-end staff with the info they need for truly data-driven decision-making.
To find out more, visit payitbynatwest.com/ITPro. That's payitbynatwest.com/ITPro. November has come to a close and the depths of winter are just around the corner. But that doesn't mean events in tech are slowing down at all, nor that attackers are taking an early Christmas break.
In the past month, we've seen a slew of cyber incidents, ranging from high-profile exploits of Microsoft vulnerabilities to a ransomware attack on a supply chain software company integral to high street brands.
Elsewhere, Google CEO Sundar Pichai has hailed the strides his company has made using AI to generate internal source code. But how far can AI code really go, and does it put software engineers at threat of redundancy? You're listening to the IT Pro podcast. Hi, I'm Jane McCallion.
And I'm Rory Bathgate.
And this week we're speaking once again to Ross Kelly, IT Pro's news and analysis editor, to unpack some of the most significant stories of November. Ross, welcome to the show.
Hey folks.
So to start with, can you run us through the Microsoft SharePoint vulnerability that we reported on earlier this month?
Yeah, so this is based on some research from Rapid7. Essentially, their incident response team published findings earlier this month around a pretty lengthy investigation whereby threat actors compromised a Microsoft Exchange Service account. This was done by exploiting vulnerabilities in a public-facing application. It's turned out to be quite a domino effect type situation here, as you can imagine, with a lot of these instances where hackers were able to access networks, lay low for a little while before being discovered, and a lot of lateral movement.
Whenever there's a flaw in something like Microsoft SharePoint, you see headlines around it, and indeed our own headline implied that this could have been fairly severe. You know, this is a widely used business application. The Microsoft suite is pretty integral to a lot of business processes. So how severe could this attack have actually been? And was it right to say that entire domains were at risk?
So naturally, very severe. It's worth noting that Rapid7's investigation found there were no attempts to encrypt data in any environments, the usual indicators of a ransomware attack, which does leave some questions over the motivations here, so to speak. But gaining access to a SharePoint server, using admin privileges on those service accounts, moving around networks, and compromising an entire domain potentially, it goes without saying that puts an organization at huge risk.
Now, the popular Chinese antivirus solution Horong is implicated in this attack, isn't it? How is that involved?
Yeah, so in this instance, threat actors use this in the attack chain to basically clash with other security products already active, in the target systems. It's quite a common technique here, inserting some form of solution or application that then has, a conflict with other applications in that environment. This was installed specifically with the aim of, disrupting existing software on the systems. But again, that enables more lateral sort of movement activities. So in Rapid7 report, they go into quite a lot of detail on the fact that they were thereby able to compromise a Microsoft Exchange account that had administrator privileges, and then they were able to then further move around additional networks. So, I mean, we're talking about, quite a deep dive here, so to speak.
So you're looking at potentially here a threat actor with very sophisticated attack vector, but then also sophisticated methods to kind of embed themselves in a corporate network and prevent them from being easily wiped with backups or rollbacks.
Yeah, so a sophisticated threat actor with sophisticated techniques, but they're using, not primitive, but they're using quite basic software here to essentially create somewhat of a cascade.
So this is a vulnerability that has definitely been exploited at least once then, Ross.
Yeah, so in Rapid7's post-mortem by their incident response team, this has been exploited, but you know, like I mentioned previously, it's a situation where the attackers in this instance didn't encrypt any data. All those usual sort of indicators of a potential attack, so a ransomware attack, it might be the case where they've been probing,
Mm.
and we know that a lot of threat actors do this quite frequently. And, especially in terms of laying low in networks, we've had a range of warnings from security agencies, both in the UK and the US about the threat of this, and a lot of organisations fall, foul of this.
Yeah, although, I mean, I guess the thing is that ransomware is kind of the headline grabbing incident or incident type, but not everybody wants to carry out a ransomware attack. Perhaps they just want to look at some information or take some blueprints or whatever it is that they were up to. So not having encrypted anything doesn't necessarily, to my mind as a layperson, mean anything.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like you can go into a shop and steal one thing. You don't have to steal everything, but nonetheless, nonetheless, you've still potentially stolen something, or you've gained the means to go back in at a later date by observing
Mm,
what's going on, and then
yeah.
that will help you in the eventual attack. Not that we're suggesting that this will happen anytime soon, but you know it is definitely part of the modus operandi of a lot of threat actor groups.
Yeah.
Some of these long-term attacks we've covered before, and I think we've spoken about it on the podcast as well. That idea of lingering in networks. Security experts will be the first to tell you that when you get an attack that actually registers, it's normally off the back of months and months of very careful probing of networks by threat actors, or even you find out that you were breached 6 months ago, but that nothing was taken at first, nothing was disrupted at first. They were just trying to figure out maybe the chain of command in your organization, or they were trying to find further vulnerabilities for that lateral movement you mentioned earlier, Ross.
Mm.
Absolutely. We have a great piece from our former news and analysis editor and cyberpro, Connor Jones, on the website. It's titled Breached for Years. It's a great read for anyone interested in that.
And we shall link to it in the show notes. Now, moving away from a sort of hypothetical encryption situation to one that actually happened, there was also a ransomware incident this month. Could you explain to listeners a little bit about who Blue Yonder is and why it being breached has had such a huge effect on a number of firms that would, at first glance, seem to be completely unconnected to each other?
Yeah, so another prime example of a supply chain attack causing, absolute havoc for customers and consumers alike. Blue Yonder provides software to, a range of major brands in the UK and the US, particularly retailers, grocery retailers, Tesco, Morrison's, Sainsbury's, Asda, and Starbucks, for example. Essentially, the software that Blue Yonder provides helps retailers model demand, respond to market changes, optimize inventory, and so it's a critical piece of software for a lot of these big brands. They first detected issues in their managed services hosting environment in the 21st of this month. They quickly realized that this was a severe incident, ransomware attack. They've been obviously scrambling since then, but there's been a number of big brands that have had major issues, especially Starbucks.
Is there any indication at this stage who specifically was behind the attack? I mean, we've had a lot of focus on the victims and the kind of destructive potential of the attacks themselves, but has anyone come forward?
To my knowledge, at the time we are recording this, it's worth noting, we do not know of anyone who's claimed responsibility for this yet, but I imagine we will hear from them in the coming days. Obviously, within the show notes, we can update accordingly, potentially. But I mean, we have seen a couple of incidents, over the last year where nobody's claimed responsibility. So, it's not out of the question that this goes completely under the radar in terms of who was responsible. But I imagine there'll be a few people in the cyber industry that can tell you or hint towards who they potentially might think it is based on their techniques, based on their practices here.
There's been no open speculation then?
Doesn't seem to be that anyone's claimed responsibility for it yet. It's also worth noting that obviously attackers are going to have to do a lot of sifting through any data that they have in their possession. So, I mean, if it is a case where they, then set a ransom or they set some form of demand in any capacity, then we're going to hear from them in due course. You can, put your money on that for sure.
It's an interesting ecosystem around exfiltrated data, isn't it, on the dark web, where a group will come forward either on an established site or on a kind of stolen data forum and say, hey, here's a cache that we stole from this company that's been breached. We were behind it. And then there's a sort of scramble by security experts to say, okay, this is legitimate data. Okay, maybe this group was behind it. And at the same time, there's kind of a push and pull, isn't there, with businesses where depending on what's been stolen, depending on potential negotiations with the attacker, they might not want that information out there. They might want this to go away quietly. Or conversely, as we've seen with gangs like Lockbit, they might want that media attention, the fight to be brought to the gang, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, recently we saw more updates on the MoveIt breach, which is from quite a while ago, where, there was speculation initially over Amazon data, Amazon employee data being leaked. And this was completely out of the blue for a lot of people. So, a lot of threat groups, they do sit on what they're holding for quite a while. And, it might be tactical move on their part at some point just to throw a spanner in the works. But at the same time, it could just be the sheer volume and logistics involved with actually putting things out there. And we do obviously see a lot of threats providing snapshots of what's available, in terms of the size of the data set and, what it potentially pertains to. But in this instance, I think we are going to have to wait quite some time. I mean, it would be sod's law if, the day this goes out, there is a big announcement online. But I mean, yeah, what can we do?
Just keep your eye on the show notes, because we will we will update if that is the case.
Whoever's responsible for the attack aside, and whether they actually claim responsibility or not aside as well, this attack is already having some very real world impacts for the people who work at the customers of Blue Yonder, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So Starbucks has been among the hardest hit here. Staff have been essentially unable to track their hours, manage pay. They've had to move to manual processes in a lot of instances. It's worth noting that Starbucks itself has said this hasn't interrupted, service to their customers. So, staff and management are clearly pulling themselves up by their bootstraps here, so to speak, and, cracking on with things. But I mean, it must be very disruptive. And, again, it does show the sort of tangible real world impact of these situations. Morrison's is another prime example. In a statement that they gave to IT Pro, they said that it's disrupted its warehouse management system. So, that's going to be a nightmare for people working in these supply chain depots that stores rely on across the country, that customers then rely on, consumers then rely on. So, it is that domino effect where you have a third-party software provider impacted, brands impacted, and then customers might be impacted further down the line.
That supply chain disruption as well, it can be particularly detrimental for months after an incident like this. I mean, if you're looking at customer-facing systems down, then you have a short-term problem in that, the customer experience is terrible. Maybe you're turning people away. But recovering from something like a warehousing issue potentially means that even when systems get back online, you've now got a backlog or you've got orders unfulfilled, and that will require overtime and a lot of investment in kind of recovery to fix.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you're talking about, major grocery brands. These warehouses will be filled with anything and everything. So, yeah, having that backlog there'll be a lot of overtime available for drivers potentially, but I'm sure, they're not going to be too happy about that. But, we're constantly talking about supply chain security risks, on IT Pro and in the industry in general. And, these keep happening again and again, and we see the impact every time. In this instance, it's been for retailers and grocers, but we've seen it in the healthcare industry, we've seen it in the energy industry.
This episode is brought to you by Cloudways, a managed hosting platform built to deliver the speed, simplicity, and reliability your business needs. Cloudways partners with industry-leading cloud providers like AWS, Google Cloud, and DigitalOcean, offering flexible and customizable plans to fit your unique requirements. With 24/7 live expert support, help is always just a click away. And right now, they're giving a flat 40% off on all their plans for 4 months straight. That's not all. You also get 40 expertly handled free migrations. Just use the promo BFCM2024 to grab this deal and free yourself from hosting headaches. Enjoy a seamless experience where your sites perform at their best, whether you're launching an e-commerce store or handling multiple client projects. Head to cloudways.com to discover how they can power your next big project. Now, separate to cybersecurity, as we teased in the introduction, Google has made some serious strides with using AI code generation for its own internal source code in the past year. And then Sundar Pichai used a recent earnings call to brag about this, didn't he?
Yeah. So AI, again, and AI coding tools, again. I feel like we've spoken about this quite frequently over the last year, but yeah, I mean, it's maybe a hint at the future of software development there. 25% of their source code is AI generated. I think the big talking point with this, at least in our coverage, is this is a major tech company, so they have the luxury of being able to not only brag about this but carry it out. How many smaller organizations are going to be up to that level even within the next couple of years? It might be quite a stretch, I think.
The first thing that I thought when I saw this was that this was Google trying to lead by example, potentially showing its customers that it trusts its AI code generation. So in this case, I'm assuming they're using Gemini Code Assist, Google's proprietary LLM for code generation. It trusts that enough that it can put that at the heart of its operations. But as you say, Google runs these systems. It has all the resources. It can use the public cloud for code generation that maybe medium or smaller businesses even wouldn't want to use or couldn't afford to use the public cloud for code generation. And then at the enterprise level, there are still these concerns, aren't there, about generating source code using AI? And if you have to be using AI for your source code in any sense, then maybe that should be in a private cloud or even run on-prem.
Yeah, and I do think it's a big statement from Google, absolutely. I mean, and it's like you said, they are clearly confident in their systems, in their products to be able to carry this out. But again, it does always come back to that human involvement in it. The big issue here is that they're not just creating AI generated source code and throwing it out there. There's still going to be some human involvement, some form of testing, some form of quality control and assurance. So it makes for a great headline, and good on you, Google. But how many developers are dedicating their time to going over this rigorously and making sure that it's ship shape?
I had the opportunity to speak to John Rose, who's the global CTO at Dell Technologies, this week. And he was talking a little bit about the use of AI code generation internally at Dell. And the kind of point that he was stressing was that this is going to have to be case by case for each enterprise. You have this proprietary data that is incredibly valuable, and you can use it to make very, very sophisticated AI coding tools. So taking a model off the shelf, fine tuning it on your proprietary source code, and then using that internally. But that you don't want that code to ever hit the public cloud, if possible, because there are major data concerns around that. And something that he had stressed was that at Dell, it had made the decision to basically handle this all internally. The entire infrastructure for it has to be done internally in order to kind of meet their concerns around passing any data into the public cloud and letting your source code get out there, because obviously that's your IP, and especially for technology companies, you don't necessarily want to be putting the bread and butter of your business kind of into a black box AI model in the cloud. So I wonder if this is kind of a great PR thing, but maybe not something that firms can necessarily learn from.
Yeah, I think what you said there about that case by case basis is, hit the nail on the head. And I think that gets lost in and amongst, the grandiose claims that we get about AI coding tools. This is going to be based on, you can take 10 organizations and each of them has their own unique individual needs. Some might be comfortable with that. Sure, they might be all in and think, yeah, Google, we're going to absolutely trust them in a public cloud scenario. But a lot of other organizations, and we've discussed this at length, not only on this podcast, but on IT Pro as well, around the fact that a lot of organizations now are looking at hybrid cloud. They do their tinkering, they do their experimentation in public cloud, and then everything gets brought back on-prem.
I do wonder as well if, there is now this nagging question about generative AI of like, okay, neat, but what's it actually for? Sort of get rich quick schemes to write an audiobook and write and voice an audiobook, according to something I got spun online the other day. And so this is Google kind of going, well, it's for this. You can do it. This is how we're using it. But as you say, Rory, it might be a bit of in some ways, a little bit of a niche use case, or somewhat unique. It's a bit like me going, oh well, we use it for managing the helicopter fleet used by our executives. It's like, well, that's wonderful, but that's not going to really be of particular use to most businesses. It might be very, very good at it, but I do wonder if it's kind of a reaction to that, as well as kind of eating their own dog food or whatever with using Gemini to actually create source code, that it's, yes, trying to answer this question now that the hype from generative AI is starting to die down a little bit, of what could it be used for, what can it be trusted to do, really.
I mean, the trust element alone there, especially with AI coding tools, is an interesting one, given that Google published a report themselves which found nearly half, 39% of developers don't trust and lack confidence in AI generated code. So, if they're talking up their own internal capabilities here, how happy are their developers here? How trusting are their developers, as part of this process? For me, again, we've spoken at this at length. We are seeing return on investment. We are seeing these use cases now in enterprises. But again, there's still a lot of hype. And it's about sifting through that. Absolutely sifting through it.
So something that often comes up when we talk about AI generated code is these fears that software engineers could be replaced by the likes of Gemini Code Assist. So how does this announcement stack up against those fears? And are they kind of, early adoption fears, or is there a legitimate reason to be concerned here?
I think it is one of those situations where developers will be looking at this and going, oh, well, if it's 25% after, 2 years of this sort of hype train, what's it going to be in another 2 or another 4? Like we said, though, you're always going to need a human in the loop. Now, that's not to say no devs, no engineers are going to be laid off in this. We've already seen, big companies like IBM looking at other areas of the workforce. HR, in particular, seems to be getting quite a rough time at the moment in terms of layoffs in that regard. or in terms of the use cases that businesses are saying AI has in that domain. But I mean, I think we're seeing a reduction in workforces across a lot of different professions as it is. Software development and engineering is probably going to be going down the same route. If you have, a team of 500 developers and engineers right now, what's it going to be in 6 years' time if you're able to generate 60% of all of your code using AI tools? You're still going to need people to check that. You're still going to need people using these tools. But I wouldn't say it's, panic mode for a lot of people, but it's definitely, there will be a few people keeping their finger on the pulse.
Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. But Ross, as always, thank you for joining us.
Great to be back.
You can find links to all of the topics we've spoken about today in the show notes, and even more on our website at itpro.com.
You can also follow us on LinkedIn, as well as subscribe to our daily newsletter. Don't forget to subscribe to the IT Pro podcast wherever you find podcasts, and if you're enjoying the show, let us know by leaving a rating or a review.
We'll be back next week with more from the world of IT, but until then, goodbye.
Goodbye.
This episode is supported by NatWest, providing ease of mind when it comes to business payments.
NatWest Payit, the bank's own payment solution, facilitates customer payments in near real time while allowing companies to track live spending. Need to collect payments without customer account numbers or process refunds without holding on to personal details? Payit has your business covered.
Payit connects directly with each customer's bank account using an API, which also allows data to be seamlessly and securely passed onto third parties. That means you can provide the best payment experience on the front end while empowering your back-end staff with the info they need for truly data-driven decision-making.
To find out more, visit payitbynatwest.com/ITPro. That's PAYITBYNATWEST.com/ITPro.